Hello and welcome. Whether you're a player new to Coastal Battles or a player who has tried the game mode before, I hope this guide can get you on the right track to success. Now, while this is a comprehensive guide, I am going to assume in the interest of time that you have at least played the in-game tutorials, so we're not going to cover basic controls. In addition, if you're already an experienced player, timestamps are available for ease of navigation. First off, settings. Before even getting into the game, there are a few settings we need to go over. They're not essential, but might improve your experience. Going from main parameters, naval battle settings, I would begin with disabling automatic target lock. This setting is the only one I'd recommend everyone to disable, as automatic targeting makes you switch targets to whatever your mouse is hovering over, which will automatically start adjusting your ranging and messing with your aim. And in Coastal, when you have multiple ships crossing your sightline, the automatic targeting will make you constantly swap between targets. An easy game breaker that I highly recommend keeping off. Range adjustments. By default, the mouse wheel is set to zoom adjustment. In realistic battles, the game does not automatically adjust the weapon range once a target is locked. It will stop adjusting after a few seconds. Hence, I highly recommend changing this option to distance correction. For zooming, the default hotkey, Z, will do the job just fine. The other settings are not as important. This is just personal preference, but you can also go to sound options and change crew language to crew country. This will make your crew use voice lines from the nation that you're using, Japanese voice lines for Japanese ships, Russian for Russian ones, etc., instead of just using English voice lines for every ship. Some people find the crew speech annoying, so you can also mute it from here if you want to. Nations. Next up, choosing what nation to play as. There is the obvious choice of simply playing whatever nation you already main. While Naval provides both fighter and bomber spawns by default, even if you don't have any in your lineup, these planes are unspated, have no crew skill, and are chosen randomly from a BR-dependent pool of aircraft. You also have to pay repairs for rented planes if you damage them. I recommend putting your own planes in a lineup, as you only get 3 boat spawns and 2 plane spawns maximum during a game anyway, so no point filling your lineup as far as it can go, like in Ground RB. I'm not gonna go too in-depth into each nation in this video, but still, here are my personal recommendations for starting trees. Germany, they have a strong start with hard-hitting early ships. They do have some technicalities, however, as their powerful weaponry tends to be placed in rear positions that requires you to show your broadsides to enemy ships in order to attack or turn rearwards, going in reverse and losing speed. However, if you're careful with your positioning, you can minimize that risk and make use of these ships as ambushers and flankers. Later on, some of their ships trade speed for even more firepower, allowing them to conduct area denial through sheer volume of fire. The Soviets, having both the MO4, an extremely overpowered early boat, as well as the reserve G5, a vessel that can be reliably used at almost any battle rating, the Soviets start off strong. However, they have a weak mid-tier, with their armored ships suffering heavily from gun wobbling on wavy seas, and also having weak, though very speedy, patrol boats. Lastly, they dominate top tier with strong frigates, the notorious SKR-7 being the bane of many players. Honestly, as long as you don't start off with Britain or Italy, you'll be fine. Lineups. I've said it before, you only have a maximum of 5 spawns in naval, 3 ships, and 2 planes. Preferably, you should at least try to fill your lineup with 3 ships. Planes do require spawn points, unlike the boats, and it's very rare that you'll get this chance to spawn 2, so even 1 will do. Additionally, both coastal and blue water vessels can be placed in the same lineup and played in the same match. This, however, does not mean you should pair your low-tier coastal vessels together with blue water vessels or together with higher-tier coastal vessels that you got by using squadron research points, unless you're sure you know what you're doing. Yes, I know some of you watching are doing this. Naval is a highly compressed game mode, ground and air cannot even compare, trust me, and many ships will struggle to do well outside of their normal BR range, or even within their normal BR range, few ships are able to handle just a normal full up tier. However, at high tier coastals, when the BR start the match with blue water vessels, there is no issue merging the lineups. This can be a way to fill up lineups too, though do be aware that the trees do not share research points. Matchmaker. Coastal is less popular than blue water, which does translate into long queue times, especially in lower tiers. The matchmaking is especially bad there, where you might not even get a match at all, or if you do, you'll have like 2 people per team, with the rest being filled with AI bots. And by that I mean official Gaijin bots, not the naval bots that everyone who plays the game mode hates. Until you're past the first tier, I would recommend sticking to arcade battles if you want to fight actual players. For game mode selection, there is little difference between the two. In arcade, enemies get marked on sight and your weapon range is adjusted automatically to your target. Players have better torpedo detection, which just triggers a crew voice line as a warning and marks incoming torpedoes. In realistic battles, you'll just have to rely on the old eyeball Mark 1. Important naval concepts. Damage models. For the small vessels you'll find in coastal, they are composed of compartments, each with a different amount of HP. Yes, HP, I said that. There are two main ways to destroy such a vessel, either through crew loss or through destruction of all compartments, aka structural damage. There also exists hull break and ammo detonations, both require large caliber cannons. Hull break works against small vessels, while ammo detonation works against big vessels. Ramming is also possible, though not reliable whatsoever. Taking into consideration the compartment damage models, you should aim to spread your damage over an enemy boat. Once a compartment has been blackened by damage, it's considered destroyed and will take almost no damage from further attacks. At that point, you need to move on to another compartment to inflict further damage. In the end, you'll end up simply destroying the enemy through crew loss or sink them through structural damage should you destroy all of their compartments. Next up, leading. Unlike bluewater, rangefinding is a rare trait in coastal ships found only at high tier. At low tier, weaponry mostly consists of machine guns and low caliber cannons, allowing you to adjust your lead easily if your first shots miss. Plus, distances between teams are also limited due to the small maps, with engagement ranges usually below 2 kilometers or 1.2 miles in freedom units, so there's not much leading needed anyway. All this should allow you to familiarize yourself with manually leading your shots, which will become more and more important as you progress through the tree. Of course, low engagement ranges also mean engagements begin quickly and finish just as fast. Leading your shots is important, but what is just as important is knowing what to hit, through spreading the damage you inflict in order to avoid hitting already blackened areas, but there are also modules on a boat that can be damaged to inflict crew loss alongside other malices. We'll go over the most important ones. Bridge. This is where the captain sits. Usually it'll be located in the central compartment or sit in its own section above the compartments. A destroyed bridge disables steering and will also inflict serious crew loss. This module repairs on its own, even if you don't call for repairs. We'll talk more about repairs in a moment. Armament and ammo. Cannons, machine guns, torpedoes, depth charges, mines, rockets. If they're destroyed, they'll be unusable until repaired. Higher caliber cannons have a chance to detonate torpedoes, depth charges, mines, or rockets on hit, but they themselves also come with large ammo storages which can be detonated to inflict fatal damage. We'll talk more over weaponry later. Engine and propulsion. Their destruction will simply force the ship to come to a stop. And there are many more less important modules, like pumps, rangefinder radar, fire control rooms, radio stations, fuel tanks, etc. Lots of these modules will not majorly impact the ships, so they're not priority targets. Now obviously this is a very simplified explanation of modules. For more information, you can go into X-ray view in the hangar and hover your mouse over ship modules. The game will give you a detailed explanation for each module. Repairs. Obviously it's best not to take damage in the first place, but this is naval, not ground. You have 3 different types of repair: the standard repair for fixing damaged modules, firefighting, and pumping. You can set these to be done automatically or manually by tapping, not holding, the repair key. I recommend setting these to manual. Calling for repairs spreads your crew through the vessel, putting them at higher risk, increasing reload time, and under automatic repair you'll likely end up trying to do multiple types of repairs simultaneously, which gives repair time penalties. You can cancel ongoing repairs by holding down the assigned repair button in case you want to avoid the penalty. Note that bridge replenishment is impossible to stop and counts as a standard repair in case of penalty application. Your repair priority depends on what needs repairing. If you have weapons or engines disabled, then standard repair should be a priority. Next, due to the speed of coastal vessels, prioritize pumping rather than firefighting. The faster you are traveling, the faster your boat will take on water. Lastly, once a module is repaired, it can be damaged again and cause crew loss once more. So it's up to you to decide whether it's worth running repairs or not. Weapons and ammo types. Again, we're sticking to coastal here, so we'll start off with small machine guns until we reach the cannons that you'll find on frigates. With machine guns beside the default belts, which you should get rid of ASAP, your options will either be HE or AP belts. The theory goes like this: wood is weaker against HE and metal is weaker against AP. Attacking a boat head-on, AP rounds will penetrate through the front and can damage other compartments as they pass through the boat. Attacking a boat from the side, HE shells can fragment and spread damage over to nearby compartments on the sides. However, optimizing like this is impractical as machine gun reloads take around 3 to 4 seconds, while an engagement's winner can be decided much quicker. Sticking to one belt over the other, HE rounds can be much more versatile as they can deal with planes better, though personally I prefer AP rounds myself as I find their damage more consistent. Additionally, although they're not machine guns, I would also include 20mm cannons in this category as they play almost exactly the same as machine guns. Moving on to cannons of the 37-40mm range, you'll find cannons like the Flak and the Bofors. Unlike previous smaller caliber weaponry, these weapons have instant reload. Swapping between different types of ammo is seamless, allowing you to choose between shell types with no drawbacks. Your AP shells penetrate more, and more importantly, your HE shells have significantly more filler and should become your go-to shell to use. The AP shell can still come in handy, however, should you face armored boats that HE shells struggle with. These cannons can shred any opposition quite rapidly, and they're the best you'll find on lower tiers. They will also introduce you to the overheating mechanic. Fire the cannon continuously for too long and it will start to overheat, becoming less and less accurate before the weapon stops functioning entirely until it can cool down. This mechanic is technically present on machine guns too, but it's only now with the instant reloads that you'll start to notice its effects. It'll still take quite a while to overheat up Flak or Bofors to the point they stop firing, though it's more or less only going to happen if there are air targets that the gunner AI continuously keeps firing at. Lastly, big guns, anything 60mm and up. These cannons have the highest single shot damage you can get, though higher caliber also translates to longer reload times, with the major exception of top tier. Leading is very important here, as missing a single shot could be the difference between killing your enemy or being killed yourself. With these cannons, you'll have the choice between 3 types of shells: HE, AP, and HE-TF or HEVT. Shrapnel is terrible and should never be taken. In general, you want to use your standard HE shell, though you may have modifications to unlock different variants of it that'll have different velocities or explosive content. It's up to you to choose between them. Personally, I prefer the high velocity shells even if they do a little less damage, as they're far easier to aim at range. AP shells in Coastal tend to have very little explosive filler, so while I recommend bringing a few just in case, HE is still king. Lastly, you have HE-TF and HE-VT shells. To put it simply, these shells have fuses that allow them to explode mid-air, either through a timed fuse, TF, or a proxy fuse, VT. They're best used against aircraft, though they'll still do just fine if you shoot them at ships. Progression. We'll go through the tiers progressively, tier 1 to 5, and discuss the ships and the tactics of each tier. There can be some significant variance between tiers, as Naval is quite heavily compressed, like a 2.3 BR difference between bottom and top tier, and the recommended playstyle will vary just as much between ship types. Let's begin with reserves. First off, at this tier you almost always want to keep up your speed, though be aware that getting yourself beached is a quick way back to the hangar. In addition, almost no boats at this tier have any armor, maps are also small, and coupled with the speedy boats, engagements will occur and finish very quickly. The most important thing in this tier is simply situational awareness. Jumping right on the fray will get you quickly killed. Use your speed to gain a positional advantage. Set up ambushes, flank your enemies to attack them from unexpected angles. All reserve boats also start off with torpedoes, though they are very unreliable at this tier because every boat is so fast, so dodging is easy. If you're going to use them at close quarters at minimum arming distance to give your enemies the least amount of time to react. A better secondary armament is actually depth charges. If you hear someone shitting on depth charges for being useless, you know that person has never played low tier coastal before. Fights will very frequently devolve into close range brawls, and with their fragile boats, simply getting yourself ahead of the enemy and dropping a few depth charges will likely net you a kill. Unless you up tier your reserve vehicle to bluewater tier, there isn't anything that can detonate your depth charges or torpedoes without killing you first anyway, so there's no reason not to take them. Let's move on to the rest of tier 1. Don't worry, I won't be doing this separation for other tiers. The rest of tier 1 mostly composes of one of 4 things: medium-sized ship with autocannons, reserve boat 2.0 edition, Japan, and MO4. None of them have any sort of protection, so they're just as fragile as the reserves. Besides the blatantly overpowered MO4, seriously, why is that thing still 1.0 Gaijin? The autocannon vessels are by far the most powerful boats of the tier, as while torpedo boats are fun, the torpedoes they carry aren't very useful yet, and their machine guns simply can't compete damage-wise. The maps are tiny, so even if they're a bit slower or have bad firing arcs, the damage of the autocannons more than compensates. A few boats also have access to rockets. Rockets are quite useful at close quarters, so I like to take them if they're available. Tier 2 is where your boats start to get bigger. Besides patrol boats still being, patrol boats, you now have sub-chasers. For all intents and purposes, treat these as bigger, slower, better armed patrol boats, as they're still unarmored. And of course you still have your autocannon boats. Situational awareness is again key. Pick your fights carefully, go for ambushes or snipes if you can. At this tier you'll begin facing armored ships, notably the PR-1124 and the HMCS Brantford. Besides armored ships, large boats tend to carry high caliber cannons, so rushing them frontally is a quick way back to the hangar. It's still only tier 2, hence repair costs aren't really a factor, so feel free to experiment with the ships of this tier to see what works best for you. Lastly, you get access to mines at this tier, and they suck. They're far too easy to dodge for coastal vessels, and they don't last on the map more than a few minutes. They're just far too situational to be useful. Tier 3, more bullets, bigger weapons. Armored ships also become more frequent, though they have their own issues to deal with as well. More importantly, it's at this tier that you'll begin to frequently see bluewater vessels in your matches. Bluewater vessels have an entirely different damage model, so you cannot deal with them the same way that you would with coastals. They also tend to have a minimum amount of armor, preventing machine guns from penetrating their structure. The best way to deal with them is to either straight up avoid them, as they have different spawns than coastals, or if you're playing with something like a patrol boat, ambush them with torpedoes. Aim for the ammo racks, usually under the bridge or under rear turrets. A torpedo will result in a one-hit kill. Fast vessels can also go for depth charge runs. Approach the side, not the front, being rammed will kill you. And dump depth charges as you move alongside the ship to destroy it. Though usually you'll need at least 4 depth charges for this to work. For tier 4, it's very similar to tier 3, but with one key exception: frigates. These ships are basically built to annihilate smaller coastal vessels, but in exchange, they struggle to deal with destroyers. They're kinda like heavy tanks, absolutely unbeatable in a down tier, but a complete joke in an up tier. It's also important to note that frigates are technically bluewater vessels, despite being in the coastal creed. They have destroyer spawns, range fighters for their weaponry, and their damage model is akin to a bluewater vessel. Unless you have powerful guns yourself, avoid engaging them at all if possible. If you are engaged and you don't have powerful enough weapons to fight back, kiss your ass goodbye. On the other hand, you'll also see corvettes in this tier. They're still classed under sub-chasers, but make no mistake, these guys are significantly more dangerous than what you've faced before. They carry frigate-level weaponry, but are much more fragile. Still, I would recommend avoiding them if possible, unless you have a way to ambush and deal with them quickly, such as with a torpedo or high-caliber cannons of your own. The most commonly used premium vessels are also found at this tier. Tier 5 is the maximum for the coastal trees, so it is possible to research an entire tech tree with tier 4 premiums like the PGO2s, Barbiero, Le Orla, or the M802. These boats are fragile but carry powerful armament. Unfortunately, doing a collective review of all of these premiums would be out of the scope of this video, and I do not have the funds to buy all of them, so please watch a dedicated review if you're actually interested in dropping $20 for one of these. Tier 5, the final tier. At this point, we're well into blue water territory. You'll face fewer and fewer coastal vessels, with matches being composed mostly of destroyers and sometimes even cruisers. You're basically playing blue water light at this point. Aside from a few patrol boats, this tier is entirely composed of frigates and corvettes. Unfortunately, most of them don't stand much of a chance against the firepower blue water vessels can bring. Well, mostly.
You should have gone for the head.
Since there are few coastal targets to hunt, it's best to go for already distracted blue water targets. If you have fast firing cannons, blasting the deck of blue water vessels with HE can be an easy way to deal large amounts of damage to their crew through damaging their modules. The more traditional slow firing cannons should go for the hull directly, aiming for the ammo or the engines. Rockets can also be quite effective at this tier, aside from torpedoes. However, since you're facing bluewater vessels with high caliber cannons, rack detonation for secondary armament is a risk, so take that into account if you want to take these. Modifications. For this section, we'll go over the mod order in terms of what you should prioritize getting. First up are firepower upgrades. Not all ships need these, for example those that fire high caliber HE rounds, if they even have them. But if you're using a machine gun, the default belts can be very, very underwhelming. Next up, rudder replacement. This improves your ship's handling and maneuverability quite significantly, and is worth prioritizing even for coastal vessels. Lastly on the priority list is primary armaments. This will increase your turret rotation speed. Less important for machine guns, but essential for anything higher up. After that, it's mostly down to preference. I prefer to finish firepower upgrades first, though not counting secondary armament, whose usefulness can vary heavily between ships, before moving on to the rest of the performance, or seakeeping, upgrades. I find unsinkability upgrades to be the least useful as we already have 3 parts in FPE, and with the already extremely fragile nature of coastal boats, shaving 15 seconds off a 30-second repair won't matter much if you die in the next 5. Crew skills. Ship Commander. Leadership is the same as in ground battles, increasing the level of every other skill by a small amount. Crew interchangeability basically adds more crew to your ship, which means you can take more losses. Both of these are high priority skills and should be leveled up ASAP. On the other hand, radio communication is entirely useless in coastal. Observers. All of these skills increase the range at which certain threats are detected. Out of them all, enemy torpedo detection is the most useful. It will play an alert sound and mark the torpedo instead of forcing you to rely on your eyes to see the torpedo's wake, but even then, all of these skills can be considered low priority. Boiler Room. Ship control reduces turning time, while fire prevention reduces the chances of a fire starting, either through a module like fuel or engines being damaged, or you being shot by HE shells. Fire prevention is the better of the two, but both skills can be considered medium priority. Gunners, these skills are important. Firstly, main caliber reload skill. This is the most important crew skill that you need to level, highest priority. Auxiliary caliber will depend on your ship. It's mostly useless in low tier where vessels only have their main gun. Since it is ship dependent, I would keep it medium priority alongside auxiliary gunner accuracy, which increases the accuracy of the AI controller while you're controlling your main caliber. Level them up according to your tech tree. German and American ships, for example, tend to have more or better auxiliaries than Russian ones. As for AAA, most coastal vessels don't have any anti-air armaments, so your auxiliaries are what you'll use to deal with aircraft. Accordingly, any skills related to AAA, reload speed or accuracy, are unnecessary. Distance fuse setting only applies to time fuse shells, which very few coastal vessels use, so skip that too. Damage control. These skills all reduce repair times, on-watering time for pumps, fire extinguishing, and breach repair for your standard repairs. Lastly, survival leadership reduces the penalty for doing multiple types of repair at once, at maximum, negating the penalty entirely. Still, in my opinion, leveling these isn't a priority for coastal battles, though they are by no means useless. Consider them medium-low priority. Logistics services and qualification are unchanged from other game modes, so we're not going to go over them. Some people recommend you export all of your crewed vehicles. I say it's not that important, but hey, I'm someone who actually levels their logistics skills, so who am I to talk? CAS. It is an important aspect of a game mode, so I can't exactly skip over this. One key difference between CAS in ground battles and CAS in naval is that cannons and machine guns are significantly more impactful in this game mode. I mean, the boats on the water are fighting each other with machine guns and cannons, just like the planes, so it makes sense. This makes fighter bombers, as well as bombers carrying offensive armaments, like attackers, significantly more useful. Bombs are great too, as even small 50kg bombs can kill patrol boats, though obviously you'll need bigger bombs if you're aiming for frigates and the like. Rockets are kind of a mixed bag. Usually you're better off just using bombs, but if your plane doesn't get a bomb sight like the IL-2, the rockets can be a viable alternative, though they'll usually require direct hit to kill due to their low explosive tonnage. Torpedoes are best avoided. Yes, I know your flying boat can carry 2 of them at once, and yes, maybe they're fun to use, but going for torpedo ones makes you a sitting duck in the eyes of any boats. They aren't viable against snippy coastal vessels, and bigger vessels will probably just shoot you down before you get a chance to drop your torpedo. They're not better than bombs, so there really isn't any reason to go for torpedoes unless you have a battle task, in which case I would recommend aiming for reserved blue water vessels as they have no meaningful anti-air. Besides a bomber/attacker, you can also bring in a normal fighter or interceptor for air superiority, or a hydroplane if you have one in your tech tree, as they have the ability to land on water and capture objectives, which can be quite useful clutching seemingly lost matches. Tips and tricks. For this section, we'll start with the simpler stuff before moving on to the more advanced techniques. Continuous rangefinding and RB. This is kind of a cheap trick and in my opinion probably a bugged interaction due to coastal vessels not having rangefinders. Normally in RB, once you target an enemy, your guns will automatically adjust to the distance between you and your target. However, unlike in arcade battles, the range does not get updated continuously as your positions shift. Ordinarily, this would force you to adjust ranging manually, except the ranging that happens when you lock a target happens every time regardless of whether it's the same target or not. What that means is you can just spam target the same enemy over and over again, use the hotkey X, and leave all ranging to be done automatically. Dealing with wavy seas in an unstable boat, a nightmare combination that can significantly affect your ship's efficiency. Sadly, besides just straight up leaving the match, you can only try to mitigate this issue. Firstly, make use of your other armament if you have any. Inaccuracy matters less with higher rate of fire. In addition, the seas immediately around an island can be calmer than open seas, but if you're desperate, you can also try intentionally beaching yourself to get out of the water entirely. Note that this will inflict damage on your compartments. It will also start the 2-minute timer to your doom, so if you're going to do this, try to beach yourself in a manner that will allow you to move and reset the counter. Angling. Now, angling in coastal is somewhat different than angling in ground battles. The traditional armor angling that you may have learned in ground battles doesn't really apply, and only a few ships are able to do that effectively, like the Russian armored riverboats. Because, angling kind of requires you to have armor in the first place to work. For those few boats that can actually pull it off, you basically want to get an angle where you can get all of your guns towards the enemy, but not going for a full 180 degrees broadside to prevent the enemy being able to hit your armor at a full 90 degrees, which would give the round maximum penetration values. This increases your armor value, and if the enemy is unable to penetrate it, angling allows you to tank hits without taking damage. Now, there is a second angling method that is unique to coastal battles, however, and it basically relies on exploiting the compartment-based damage model. You want to put your ship in a position/angle where only a minority of your compartments are exposed to the enemy, so that even if those compartments are destroyed, you'll still remain afloat thanks to your other compartments being undamaged. A well-known example of this is bow tanking. Bow tanking is basically front towards enemy. Since coastal uses compartment-based damage model, like I said, you can sacrifice your frontal compartment to tank incoming damage while keeping your other compartments protected. It's best done with vessels that have their armament concentrated in the front. The Type K, for example, has its 40mm cannons located right in front, allowing it to keep up fire while bow tanking. Larger vessels can even tank torpedoes this way, and yes, of course, that includes the Type K. Do note that on smaller vessels, AP shells will penetrate through multiple compartments, so bow tanking will not work as well, as your other compartments will still take damage, though less. Anti-bluewater artillery. Naval artillery is much more powerful than ground artillery and can pose a threat to even the largest ships. However, the artillery itself isn't very effective against small boats. Shells that impact the water won't do any damage, though the impact force might flip a small boat. But if you think of it like Battleship, the board game, there are only so many spaces the artillery can land in, so what if you call it against a bigger boat? Now, guessing where to call the artillery can be difficult, but you do have two functions that can help you. First is radio communication. Target the enemy ship, then call out target this enemy over radio by using the commands. This will mark their position on the map, and then you can call artillery on it. The second method is quicker but can be less accurate. Look at the enemy, mark them with the squadron ping, and then call artillery on the squadron ping mark. The hardest part of doing this is estimating the lead you need to give a target, since it relies entirely on guesswork. And lastly, since artillery shell dispersion is random, there's no guarantee you'll actually get a kill even if you land it spot on. I do sincerely hope this tutorial helps to ease you into the rather chaotic game mode that is coastal battles. Of course, practice makes perfect and all that, but Naval is a genuinely underrated game mode, in my opinion. The experience of only playing it because Gaijin forces you to do so to complete battle tasks and actually playing it from the ground up is very different. Jumping into the mode with high tier premium or event vehicles without having learned important aspects of the mode, or up-tiering your coastal vessels to play them alongside blue water vessels, is only going to result in you facing much deadlier vessels and experienced opponents from the get-go. And well, if we had more people playing this game mode, maybe Gaijin would remember that we exist.